Well, he's an angry fish, as you can see. I think he's more disgusted with himself that an old duffer like me's managed to catch him. But there you can see, beautiful fish, caught during filming. Always a result. Never in any doubt really once I stuck hooking him with the PB gear, which we're going to talk about shortly. But for now, just enjoy this fella. This is why we go carp fishing, and this is what I always love about it. Mid-20, what size is in material when they look like this? Carp fishing, can't beat it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, happy Christmas. This is something of a rare treat for me. This is a biopic piece, I would probably call it. Something that I've never done before. And when Brad and the media guys at PB asked me what I thought about it, I was a bit reluctant to begin with, because I do like to be not just technically oriented, but I like to, hopefully, when I'm dust, people will say for all his foibles, he did try and help people by passing on knowledge to help themselves catch fish. So I've always, on all the Q&As that I do each month for PB Products, live from the bivvy, they all tend to be strategic sort of situations where if you do A, B, C, you'll catch more fish. If you don't do D, E, F, this won't happen. All those sort of things. Whereas when you talk a biopic type of piece, which is this, it's really all about me, and I've always tended to shy away from them. But I think as you get older and uglier, I think sometimes to reflect upon the season that you've had, particularly at the year end, is something that we all do. And I hope you'll indulge me for a few minutes while I give a sort of not a blow-by-blow account, because that wouldn't have you falling asleep. Trust me, I'd be asleep before you. It's an account of how I've changed the tactics as the fish have been coming, which I think is biopic, but also is, I hope you think, interesting. So let's start at the beginning, and strangely enough, here we are. You can see it's a cold December day. Water temperatures are single digits, very low, 5 degrees. The air temperature's freezing. Got a north wind, although funnily enough it's just swung round now. And you might think, oh, it'd be easier, Holmes, if I just sat in front of the fire watching YouTube videos about Tom, Dick and Harry catching big fish in the summer. But no, you know, I've always stressed the important point of still being out there doing it. And as I am getting older, one thing that I can assure you, and I will guarantee to you, is that the day that Mark Holmes can't get out on the bank today, then he won't be talking about all our yesterdays, because that to me is not what I'm about. I need to try and be relative, and the way about being relative is to still be out there. And that's why I'm with PB Products, because their range is something that keeps evolving. And it's not going to be a plug fest about PB Products, but because it's a PB Products video, I think it's important that there's an emphasis on why a silly old bugger like me is with them after 12 years. Well, let's go back in this year to March 2023. And March was the time that I started getting my carp head on. And what I tend to do, no big surprises, like a lot of people in the carp fraternity, once the river's shut and me my bit of piking and various things end, I then get me carp head on. Well, let me tell you, this March 2023, the water temperatures were very cold, and I've done a lot of shows up and down the country in the last 2 or 3 years where I talk about the importance of water temperatures. And I always say to people that 12 centigrade water temperature is, to me, the green light. Because what happens at 12 C is that the carp's full ecosystem is working. Now, don't get me wrong, they don't suddenly come to life at 12 centigrade, but their build up to full ecosystem working is gradual. So I'll give you an example. If we've got cold spring temperatures like we had in March, of water temperatures 7 and 8 degrees, it just means the carp will feed, but not all the time. So the important thing then is location and understanding when's too much and when's not enough. So I very quickly decided to fish a big pit up in Lincolnshire, a pit that's like 35 acres, and it was quite a shock to my system really, because I managed to, very lucky, it was my first trip up there, and I managed to catch a fish, I think about 36.5, 37 pound on my first trip, and that's the result. Because irrespective of what anybody tells you, when you go first time to a water, you're not going blind, but you certainly aren't going in with the knowledge that you've got on a water that you know like the back of your hand. So I went in, and one thing that's important for people to understand is that the water temperatures are constant. They are only varied by the influx of water, not so much the air temperature. And this March 36.5, 37 pounder that I caught was a classic example. Daytime temperature on the Monday, 7 to 8 centigrade, not bad. Took the water temperature, 7 centigrade, not bad. Are you ready for this, boys and girls? On the Tuesday, it dropped to -7. Oh yeah, where else in the world could you have the following day a swing of air temperatures of 15 degrees? However, do you know what the water temperature was when it was -7? +7. So the water temperature hasn't changed. And I got this fish just as it was coming light, be about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I got 3 bleeps. And obviously, being of an age, I don't need loads and loads of sleep like I did when I was a growing young man. I was out with the bivvy in a shot, and I just saw the tip just moving round and the indicator moving forward, and that was enough for me. Anyway, I played this fish, few anxious moments, but very much like all cold water animals, they're not as charging about as much as when the water's warm. So it was bundled in the landing net, and as you'll see with the still, I was over the moon with that fish. And one of the things which I want to emphasise over the next few minutes is that this isn't going to be a catalogue of me with Biggie 1, me with Biggie 2, me with Biggie 3. No. Those of you who know and listen to my ramblings will know there's something more about it. What I'm going to do is pick about half a dozen highlights, and they're not all going to be 50 pounders, they're not all going to be 40 pounders. I think 2 of the highlights that I've spoke about, yeah, I've just spoken there about one at 36.5. So it's not sizist, it's something that puts a switch on, and hopefully it puts that switch on for you. And that first switch, which really came to me, was that's the coldest air temperature I've ever caught a carp. So at -7, I got this take. The rods were frosted over, looked like it had snowed, and there we see the water temperature was 14 degrees higher. So the one thing I'd say to you there is that don't think that the air temperature will make or break your session. It's your water temperature that you have to worry about. So I was off to a great start, and unfortunately I'd had issues with my health. Now, this is not going to be a medical report, a doctor's appointment at A&E with Dr. Holmes. No, far from that. It's been well documented that I nearly keeled over with an heart attack. Well, we've got over that now. But what did me was I started with this nasty thing called carpal tunnel, which basically is you're getting shooting pains down your hand don't work properly, got numbness, all that old nonsense. So I had an operation in January. Anyway, March and April, everything's sound and wonderful. But would you believe, just like everybody told me, I started getting it in the other hand. Well, of course, being the selfish old bugger that I am, there was no way I was going to go under the knife when the fish were biting. So I thought, well, I'll get round. I'll plenty of paracetamol and plenty of this and plenty of that. And well, let me tell you, as I'm going to come on to, that was probably one of the worst things I could do. But I've got carp fever. I want to catch carp. So there was no way that I was going under the knife in the spring. So March time, I'm at it. So fueled up by this 37, I then reluctantly agreed to start doing a bi-monthly diary piece with Total Carp. And so for the first time in my 48 years of carp fishing, I had to start making notes and all that sort of old jargon. That's not actually true, because those of us of a certain age, if a fish farted, we'd have made a note about it in the 80s. But anyway, I'm getting off the point. So I started documenting details of weather, details of occurrences, details of base placement, doing little drawings in books and stuff. In actual fact, for this film, I'll send Brad a little picture of some of the doodles that I've done so you can see. But basically, it was like going back to the 80s and 90s for me, where I was documenting everything. And as March moved on, I got to the last week in March and I caught some lovely fish. I think I had a 44 common, which was a beautiful, clean fish, and I had a 45 leather, which was brilliant. And so I really was on it, as they say. This culminated in getting up to springtime, and I always fish in spring. We used to call it duffer's fortnight. Basically, it meant that anyone could catch big ones, and I still believe that. Once carp switch on in spring, they're not particularly hard to catch. The hard time of the year to catch them is the cold water and the high water. Cold water because their system is not fully operational, so the feeding periods are very short, and high temperatures, the competition from natural food is so high that a little round ball, as they pass hunting a shoal of small fry, is a nothing to them. So those, to me, are the two occasions when you've really got to be focused. Duffer's time, literally, you could throw out and you're in with a shout. So I'd done well in Duffer's time. I was catching them, and I topped it off by a 50. I think I had a 53 mirror. When people talk about girth, look at that. That is just absolutely incredible. What a fish. And everything was going fine. But the old carpal tunnel on the left hand was now starting to bite in, to such a point where I would, this sounds ridiculous, but it's true. I'd cast out, and the grip in my left hand was so bad, I'd cast out. And one time I cast out a spom, and the whole lot went out of my hands. So I went to cast the spom out, and the rod went, and everything went. And it coincided with me, very fortunately, getting a ticket on Grenville. And we all know about the distances that people speak about to fish Grenville. A very good friend of mine, Jason Kahn, and Roger Bacon, and Saul Garner, and Richard Hughes, and one or two other people down there. I've had tickets for a while, so I was really not in tune with the water, but I understood some of the idiosyncrasies of it. And then I'd met Paul Ward, the owner down there, and again, getting off the point, Paul gets a bad press off some people because he doesn't do with idiots. But I've got to tell you my experience, what a fantastic ethos that man has on how to run a carp fishery. You know, that place is a premier carp water, not by accident, but by design. I don't think I've ever seen a man work as hard on a fishery. And of course, you know, I've seen it through the years. Phil Gregory is the same with his Deepings complex, worked his nuts off over the years to bring the fruition that people are getting for the last 10 years. Same with Sam Anderson up at the Approach, Rob Ailes with his fisheries. You know, all these people that, you know, sometimes get a good press, sometimes get a bad press because they haven't let Fred in and they haven't let Tom in and they haven't let Harry in, and it's a nonsense. But these guys, we should treasure them because these are the people that give us the amenities that allow old duffers like me to catch these big fish. But anyway, I digress. But so we get back to the story. So the carpal tunnel is in terrible condition, but I knew there was a particular fish in here, one of the syndicates that I wanted to catch it. I'd been down to Grenville and I couldn't hit the distances that I wanted to. So what I decided was to put on the back burner while I did have the operation on my other hand, and then I would get the rehabilitation and get stuck into it at a later date. So my fishing basically was curtailed down to, let's say, 25 wraps or less. And one thing again which is important for people to understand, if I am a 100-metre runner, there is no point me entering a marathon. And it's the same with your carp fishing. You get today great carp anglers who are very good at lots of the disciplines: casting, baiting, accuracy, durability, all the sort of things that people talk about. Most of us are good at one of those things. Maybe if you're lucky, you're good at about two of them. That's Mark Holmes. Mark Holmes has never been a long caster. So it doesn't make sense to me to suddenly try and think that I can cast long. I can learn and I can try and better what I did before, but you've got to try and work on your strengths. And because I've been curtailed with my hands, 2023 had to be about 25 wraps or less. So I knew that this particular big fish that I wanted was due out, and it's a lovely fish. It's never done 50, but I'm not bothered about that. It's just a fantastic fish, and it's one that it's quite hard to catch. And I had to have an operation at the end of May, and it was booked in for a Thursday morning, and I was at the lake, yes, you've guessed it, on the Wednesday, the day before the operation. And you wouldn't believe it. Yeah, it's done for the camera, you say. No, it's not done for the camera. It's done for my diary piece. The simple reality was, with about 3 hours left before I had to pack up and go under the knife, off-road one of the rods, and I'm playing this fish, and I knew which one it was. And you'll see a little bit of video footage, and it was, I think, 48, just over 48. A bit more footage of this fish. Look at the size of this fish. This fish is enormous. Just shy of 48 pounds. Absolutely over the moon with it. Let's have a look at it there. There's the mat. Look at the size of its belly. Look at that fish. And I'll put my hand down. There's my hand. Look at the girth of that fish. That is one hell of a big carp that took a liking to trigger ice and a nice little liquid combination. Over the moon with this fish. Worked hard. When I was in agony playing it, I literally was playing it with one hand, but I managed to land it somehow, bundle it in the net, and all the pain was forgotten temporarily, and off we go. Now we get to May and all my water's shut. Some carp fart and the owners shut them for weeks on end, but they shut ostensibly in May. So I was curtailed into what fishing I could do. I do like a bit of tench fishing, so basically May was off the register when it came to carp fishing, but I started again in June. And there's let's swing up to the north now. There's a water in Wharfdale in Yorkshire that has a couple of really nice fishing and a growing backup stock. And I'd been very lucky. I'd caught the biggest in there. I'd held a late record for a while. We'll show you a picture of it. It was, I think it's nearly 50 pounds now, but when I caught it, it was 44.5 or 45 common, something like that. One of the biggest commons in proper commons in the north. But there was a second biggest common in that lake. It was a male. He didn't come out very often, and I always fancied catching him. And he was about upper 30. So again, he wasn't a 40, but he was about upper 30. And he was a proper male carp. I'd seen him a few times when I'd walked around, always fry feeding. And he usually was one of those once a year type of captures. So I thought to myself, I'm going to have a go for him. And I'd been up a couple of times on a recce, and I wanted to fish a particular spot where I could get a little bit of peace and quiet from, because it was an open access water, club water, where you could literally pay 50 quid and fish in the next day. So you can imagine the sort of footfall that it had. Very difficult to get things going. But this particular time in June, I managed to get up there, and I managed to get on a bank that had the southwest wind blowing into it, and there was a tree line that went up the side. So imagine being in a corner of a lake and you've got a tree line to your right and a path going up that tree line. I was in the last swim, so basically it meant that no one could impede their lines into this corner. Now the big drawback with that, as I'm sure you all get to, is that what's going to happen is that they're either there or they're not there, and you're right. But over the course of a session, I did 2 nights on there, and I got a plethora of runs. I got a load of runs because the fish were coming down that bank away from the rest of the lines, and I was ambushing them as they came down to the corner. And anyway, to cut a long story short, on the second morning, I gets this take that was different to the rest. Big fish takes tend to be quite fastidious if they're a pressured fish. So you'll get a tightening of the line and you'll get the rod tip going round. Sometimes with younger carp, you'll get the one noters and all the rest of it, and people think they're big fish. Invariably, fish that have been hooked and caught a lot and fish that are canny don't do that. A lot of the time, I do believe that they will get hooked and they'll sit on the spot. But because I'd come up with this weighted hook, which I'd been working on for the 2 years, and if you look back at the PB Products TV, you'll see that we've done quite a detailed video about the weighted hook. What the weighted hook did do was these canny fish that were used to being hooked, and then they'd use the leverage of the boilie and the lead to get the hook back out of them, and you'd only get an odd single bleep or suddenly. Well, with the weighted hook, they couldn't do that, because that weighted hook to me meant that once it was in, and their ability to lever it out was negated. So this second morning, sees a tip goes round, bends into this fish, well, all hell let loose. And one of the things I'll say to you about big male carp, particularly common male carp, is when they've got the frame, and you'll see with the still that we've got, and I think we've also may have a little video clip for it of you. It was a fish called Dave. Here we go, boys and girls. Been very lucky again. This is Dave, second biggest common at Knotford. Spawned out 33.5. Absolutely over the moon with it. Absolute lovely fish. Just shows that the future's good on this gaff. And it came to the usual combination, special liquid and trigger ice. Let's get her back, get her up to a normal weight in autumn. Like I said, it was a real rare one, real old Yorkshire fish, and I was absolutely over the moon to catch him. So that really was the highlight for me for summertime. And so I then went back on to Grenville to try and catch a big one on short distances. And one of the things that this film hopefully does is show you that Mark Holmes don't catch all the time. And I went to Grenville 4 weeks on a bounce, never had a bite, never had a bite. And I could see the fish, but I couldn't reach them. But because I never quit, because I'm a stubborn old bugger, I thought, right, what I need to do is get some runs. If you write a diary piece and you just sat behind motionless rods, it's about as interesting as my dad's vest. And he's been dead 20 years. So, you know, you've got to have some sort of activity for people to read. So I went back down to one of my syndicate waters on the Lincolnshire-Cambridgeshire border, and started to catch fish. And when I mean started to catch fish, I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, I was catching I did a little analogy of it, and in 4 sessions, 4 3-night sessions, I caught over 80 carp. Yeah, over 80 carp. And they weren't doubles or things like that. You know, the 30s in there. But here's the thing. There were 30s in there and there were plenty of 20s, but the real big ones,
I wasn't getting the real big ones, and this was a key shift for me, and I've written about it, but now I'm going to talk about it. I think out of 80 carp, I had something like 4 or 5 40s, which I know to some people is a really nice, you know, well done, great, what a season you're having. But I knew the potential of the water that I was fishing, and I just realised that I was catching shoalfish. So I needed to change my tactics accordingly. And what I did was I started to then understand that I needed to bait the fish away from the hook bait. Now that sounds ridiculous, because there's a tendency in carp fishing, if you're getting bites, to think the next one could be the big one, the next one could be the big one, the next one could be the big one. It takes some balls, pardon my language, to suddenly think after all the activity, I need to stop all this activity. And that's what I did. What I suddenly decided was to keep the baiting pattern the same, so keep the shoal fish in one area, but fish subsequently the hook bait away from the main area. And that's not groundbreaking, ladies and gentlemen. You know, that's been going on for years and years, but it needed to be done in such a fashion that it was methodical, but it was intentional. Now let me explain about that. All the action were coming on clear spots in very weedy areas. I could see though that fish were bubbling in weedy areas, but you couldn't present the bait there. So what I did was, by the use of longer hook links, which we have again in our video collection on the PB Products TV page, you'll see that we've spoke about the longer rigs, the longer blowback rigs that I've used in the past. Well, this one was what we called a longer multi-combi rig, and it was basically using the red ant as a stiff material to stop it tangling, and then I'd use the chameleon braid at the business end, the hook end, with a multi-rig type setup on a KD and a little wafter going down. But the real key to that rig, as I've alluded at the time when we've done the video, is the anchor point. The anchor point was distributed by use of one of the tungsten anti-tangle sleeves rather than a piece of putty which had a mass like your little fingernail. I didn't want that. I wanted the weight that anchored it to be distributed over a longer range so that it would come and rest in the weed. Well, that worked absolutely perfect. I did what I christened the Holy Trinity, which was I had 3 runs on 3 different rods, and they were all 40 pounders. You'll see some of the footage and the pictures. We had I think a 43 or a 46 leather, and then I caught the biggest leather in the lake at 48, and then I had a mirror at 40. So it was really an highlight, and that leather, to be fair, was one of the highlights. So that's one of the highlights that I'll mention of the year. That is a fish that doesn't come out very often because it is a tremendous fighter. And one of the things that I would say to you about fish that visit the bank rarely doesn't necessarily mean they don't get hooked frequently. Sometimes they get hooked frequently, but they don't get landed frequently. And I don't make any bones about it. The control monoline that I use from PB, I use the 0.43, which is 33 pound breaking strain. And my brother, who's not a carp angler, calls it tow rope. And he always says to me, now then, our kid, are you still using tow rope? And I don't make any bones about it. It's not tow rope, but the simple reality is that the breaking strain affords the ability to negate against me making mistakes. If you can smoothly cast and feather it down and everything's hunky-dory, well, goodness me, I'm dropping cups of tea when I pick them up, so what am I going to be like when I'm casting out? What am I going to be like when I'm playing a fish? So I need something in my armoury that's going to allow an old duffer like me who makes mistakes a bit of latitude where it don't mean that the fishing line is going to break. So something that's strong and stout, abrasion resistant, sinks like a stone is something that I want. And that is what the control mainline brought me and has always brought for me. So that was the downfall of the leather. Now, there was a missing piece to me I could see a particular spot on the lake where there would be frequently one or two big fish would give themselves up. They roll, and when you get to know fish, if you get in the right direction, you can see them roll sideways. And when you see a fish roll sideways, you get a better understanding of the size of them. Example, if I look straight at the camera here, I get a flat image. If I go and stand over there and look at the camera, I then understand the width of that camera, so I can ascertain how big the camera is. Same with carp fishing. So if you're viewing fish in front of a bar, sometimes it helps if you go around and fish along the bar rather than straight to it. And so I realised that there were big fish that I wasn't catching. And so I changed the rigs again. I went from the long combi rig, I went to make it even longer. So it was like 3.5 foot. That's a new little fillet of information I'm giving out, which I haven't given before. But I made it even longer. And incredibly, I'd fallen in the summer, in September, beginning of September, slipped on a log, and I'd ended up in. The glasses disappeared. I was like Captain Mainwaring off Dad's Army, straight in. I jumped up, no glasses to be seen, and people don't understand the hard work that Mark Holmes does. I then drove 120 miles to get a pair of glasses to drive back down. I didn't say, oh, this is no good. I had a pair of prescription sunglasses in my van. I managed to get home. But the thing is that people don't see that. They just see and me talking shite in a bivvy. That's not what it's about. The hard work that goes on to get to those situations is what brings the success. And that, coupled with being with the right tackle companies. Everybody knows the tackle companies that I'm with, and they're there by design, not by accident. And so I knew that, getting back to the point, I knew that I was not getting the big fish that I wanted. So I changed the setup again, longer hook ring, and I hooked one of the big ones. And this, you couldn't script this. I had to pick it as an highlight because I'm playing this fish, and I knew it was a big one, over 50 pound. And as I'm playing it, I thought to myself, what I'll do is I'll do what they do in sea fishing. I'll pump the fish. So I'd put the rod down and lift it up. And as I lifted it up, I walked towards the end of the swim. So I reeled, then I'd walk back, and then I'd put it down, and then I'd walk to the front of the swim. And so I think they call it, pardon the expression, I think they call it pumping in sea fishing. So I was pumping this fish nearer and nearer and nearer and nearer and nearer and nearer to me. And in the end, I got this fish to about 40 yards from the bank because it had gone on 100 plus rum. And I could see it was one of the big ones. And suddenly, on the 40 yards, it arced to my right. So I thought, oh, no problem, I'll still keep pumping it, give it a bit of line. So it set off down to the right-hand side. So I let it take a bit of line off, and I thought, oh, this is marvellous, I've got this under control, I'll start pumping it. And I'm pumping it and I'm pumping it. But because it had gone to my right, I'd turned my body, so I'm facing this part of the swim, not that part of the swim. So I'm pumping it, and this is true, this is no lie. I'm pumping it backwards, and as I walked backwards, I walked off the end of the swim. Little bleep there. And as we walked off the end of the swim, I went into 6 foot of water. So here's silly old duffer, rod in his hand, in again, 6 foot of water. Well, incredibly, I managed to jump up with the rod still in my hands, and the fish is still on. Scrambled back onto the top of the swim, dripping wet through, managed to bundle the fish in, and that was 53. So I was over the moon with that fish. And then people told me, well, you've run out of time, Holmesy. We're into cold water conditions. The water temperatures had plummeted down to single figures. It were 9 degrees. And I'd not blanked at all, but I'd gone 1 week with 3 nights. I'd had a 35 pound common, which was a lovely fish. And then I caught what I call the immaculate common. And that fish was 39, and that again is one of my highlights. And I'm going to show you a little bit of footage of that and a picture. Look at that. 39 pound
common. What a fish. This one hasn't been caught for 3 years, apparently. God, he's heavy. Let's get it back. But what a fish. Absolute belter. That fish hadn't been out for 3 years. And again, it was because I believe it fights very, very hard. And when I caught that, I was over the moon. It was, I first caught it about 3 years ago, so it was a repeat capture, but it's such an elusive fish to catch. And I'd seen it, and I'd changed my tactics. I'd come shorter. I'd changed the bait a little bit. I'd put a particular additive in that I've used for a lot of years that is predominantly rich in sugars which help fermentation, which attracts the commons. And that was £39, and that fish is called the Immaculate Common. So we're now getting on to my last highlight, and my last highlight is what I've christened the cold water beast. And it's quite poignant really, because that highlight was this morning, and that particular fish weighed 55.8. 55.8 in 5 degrees water temperature, with freezing temperatures at night and an air temperature of 1, with a northerly wind blowing at me, riddled with arthritis, was probably up there with one of the best accomplishments I've done in carp fishing. Look at this fella. Let's have a look at him. Look at that bad boy. Now that is 55.5 pounds of pristine cold water carp. Look at the girth of that chap. Look at the size of him. He is ginormous. Whoa. And this water is freezing. It's just 5 degrees. Whoa. And I'm over the moon with this chap. Look at him. Look at that fish. That is massive. And what can I say? Trigger ice, mixture of the solubles and the liquid boosters. Got to stimulate the olfactory system that I was going about. But for now, never mind about all that scientific garbage. Let's actually watch it. Look at that fish. Let's watch her swimming away. Thank you for coming. Look at that, Brad. I am absolutely freezing. Get it? Yes. And I want to make an important point about that. The water level had gone up 18 inch over a week. We've had that much deluge of rain. So when I got here, I could see how much water was in there. And the relevance of that is that
particular area where I wanted to fish, which was a slope at the bottom of an island, the island was flooded as well. So suddenly, a banking which the carp could only rest up against, once they came up onto a shelf that they now had, they had water, they could go through the island. So what it basically meant was I couldn't fish a free running reel. I had to fish a very, very tight clutch. Now, the tight clutch held, and when I got the bite, it was 2 bleeps and the tip went round. But if I tell you that I had to stop a big fish like that going through the island, I could feel as I was bent into the fish, I could feel the line fraying, cracking against the trees, and I could see some of the more flimsy type trees moving as this big fish was going through. And I thought to myself, the line's either going to go or the hook's going to pull, but I'm going to hold on. And let me tell you, the relevance of this from a PB Products thing is, once again, that control mainline didn't let me down. And I will stand on a courtroom stage and I will take a lie detector test. That control mainline is the reason why Mark Holmes catches so many big fish, because the conversion of chances when it's cold water, when it's tough times, is the difference between success and failure. And when I caught it, when I weighed it at 55.5, I had tears in my eyes, because I'd gone through a season. I'd ended up with something like, I can't remember, I think it was my 23rd fish over 40 pound, my 4th 50, and I'd caught over 100 30s, despite being riddled with arthritis and operations, still out there doing it. And one of the things that I'd like to say as I come to the end of this little sequence is, without the help of the sponsors, without the help of people like PB Products, Mark Holmes wouldn't be as successful. Yes, I'm a professional angler, and yes, I have the time now, but let me tell you, without the landing net underneath the high wire, which people have in the circus, they'd fall and kill themselves when they're practicing. And it's exactly the same when I'm fishing. Without the strength and the balance of the fishing tackle that I have, I wouldn't land these monsters, because I could quite easily have got that bite this morning and that line would have frayed and I would have been none the wiser. So as we round up 2023, thank you for all your support for the products that we have at PB Products. We never take it for granted. We're not the biggest terminal tackle company going, we know that, but I tell you what, in Mark Holmes' opinion, we're certainly the best. A Merry Christmas to you in 2023, and God willing, I'll see you all in 2024.